Hello. I think I've started streaming, but I'm not sure. I want to check the audio on YouTube, so bear with me. Um, let's see. I want to check. Oh, it sounds good. Okay, I think we're good. Okay. Um, Hello. It's been a very long time since I did a stream. I actually was looking back, and I think the last streams I did are either Schizo FM with Owen, or I was reading David Hume at one point many years ago. So that's interesting. But obviously here, you might be able to tell from the massive cover I've got to the side of me, but I've also got a small cover here, which is my book, Attention, with the subtitle Eugenics and Dystopia. I'm really happy with it. I think I've definitely developed my writing style a lot. Um, since I did the Iconoclast, and definitely since I did Missing Axioms as well. Um, I think it's my work has become incredibly different from most philosophy that I've read. Generally, um, generally speaking, the tomes of philosophy that you've read before, I think they're beautiful. I mean, I've got the example here, which is one of my sources for the book, which is one volume of Schopenhauer's World as Will of Representation, which is a phenomenal, amazing book. But I don't know if this is for most people. I think that you have to be a little bit crazy to not just want to read one of these, but to read two volumes of it. And it's not like it's in a particularly easy to read cadence either. Um, and this is the English edition. So the next step would be to read it in German as well. So like I said, this is it's philosophy is very important to me, and I think I have a natural tendency to not be as verbose as most people who write philosophy, and I think I have a natural tendency to want to write the sort of thing I'd like to read, which is the sort of writing that sets off those little fireworks in your brain as you're reading it, whether it's from the turn of phrase or from just throwing in something controversial, which this book does in spades. Like every chapter is quite short and quite punchy. Um, Generally, no more than about half a dozen pages. Um, and that's not to say it's not philosophically deep or anything like that. I think that and this is something I followed, not with Missing Axioms. Missing Axioms was intended to be quite short, but this and the Iconoclast, they were about two-thirds longer when I finished the first draft, and I did spend a lot of time with both of them, just kind of killing. You should do this if you want to become an author. If you want to become a good writer, you have to kill a lot of your children. Don't be too precious about. Oh, I need this extended section for this reason. Um, I always went in with the intention, oh, what would I like to read? Sort of keeps you away from things becoming too self-indulgent, which I think a lot of philosophers fall afoul of. Even the great Nietzsche, I think it's fair to say that he's a little bit self-indulgent at times. Um, so yeah, I'm super happy with it as a book. Um, I think it will be interesting to a lot of different people because it covers so many different topics. Obviously, it relates to Schopenhauer primarily, but also uses the Stoics as a source as well, because they dealt with a lot of the similar topics that I talk about in this book. Um, Lots of the OG turn of the century British sources on eugenics, like Galton and Schuster, they are fairly important sources to the book, and to find physical copies to read, I had to go and sit in the British Library about, like, must have been over 2 years ago now, when I was doing the initial reading for this. I had to go and rent them out of the British Library and sit in the reading room, which was a fun experience. So that's another big source. And I touch on a lot of different topics, and I think that's one criticism might be that it's a little bit diffuse. It doesn't really do justice to any of those topics, but I think it gives the reader the opportunity to go further if they want to. And I also thought it was a good opportunity for me to think about what I want to write about in more depth moving forward. So yeah, the topics obviously, relate most things back to Schopenhauer's concept of the will, and obviously that has a thread which goes back through Kant and into the rest of European philosophy. But it does primarily relate things to desire, which is why I talk about the Stoics a lot, which are almost like a contrary position to Schopenhauer in some ways. I specifically am quoting Marcus Aurelius in the book. But then I found that you can't really talk about desire unless you talk about sex, which is, if you come from the materialist position of Schopenhauer, and again, this follows all the way down into very scientistic, atheistic thinking today, is that it follows through into modern thoughts about, well, everything can be explained by evolution and sexual impulse, and that obviously has influences into psychology and stuff like that. But I thought the things that Schopenhauer writes about sex in his work are so interesting that I wanted to pick that up as a fundamental topic. Because obviously, this doesn't even serve as a summary to even part of Schopenhauer's work, but it does pick up on what of the sexual insights he had, which I thought were very interesting. And then, naturally, if you follow that thread, you immediately bounce up against eugenics, which is, I suppose I still don't really know what I think about it. There's a natural, to anyone, I think to any human being, there's sort of a natural ethical wincing that happens when you talk about such a subject, because it does seem incredibly harsh. And it has historical baggage, naturally. But then you have the other side, and this is a popular thread online with certain people, where they want to say, oh, eugenics is actually good. And but they tend not to be the sort of people that would do particularly well under a eugenical system, which is interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of movements made in the direction of the eugenics topic in this book, and I'm very happy with including that. I do sense that will be a larger project for me in the future, I hope. And so moving on from that stuff, the next place to go with desire was to talk about one of the biggest technological changes, I would say the two biggest technological changes that have happened, I guess, in the last 2 decades, because it only really became mainstream in the last 2 decades, is firstly the internet, and then you have the smartphone. And I think the first is obviously bigger than the second, but the second one, the smartphone, enables the internet to have such an impact. And then we inevitably hit up against the elephant in the room, which is that the internet is something like a third of the internet is used for pornography. Like the bandwidth is used for pornography. And so the internet allows people to have unrestricted private access to pornography. And not just erotica, I'm talking about the crazy stuff you see today if you go to any of those sorts of websites. This is where a bit of honesty comes out in the book as well, is that when you look into this stuff, this is why they can't study pornography use, because there is no control group. They cannot find a group of men who has never used pornography, pretty much. I think they have, maybe you could go for the Amish or something like that, but then they don't really serve as a normal control group for doing scientific studies. So we'd be kidding ourselves to say if this wasn't a ubiquitous issue, to say the least, but then I would argue a ubiquitous problem because of the way in which it affects men's natural drive. I talk about that a lot in the book, and actually one of the main sources in the book on that topic is Gary Wilson's, I think Gary Wilson, am I right? I should know this probably. Yeah, Gary Wilson, Your Brain on Porn, which is a tremendous book, but also a really tremendous website you can visit that has a bunch of information about this subject. Some people draw some very black and white conclusions from what he's done, but I feel like a lot of it just tracks with what we know. And yeah, and then the kind of the final thread of the book is the idea of cybernetics and utopia. And so it seems, and it seemed a bit weird to me at the time, but I was reading a lot of Stafford Beer and his work on cybernetics. And it was just as an interest to me, but it was at the same time I was reading Schopenhauer, and I saw a connection between, obviously the will, because that's how we experience desire from a Schopenhauerian perspective, but also how desire connects to cybernetics. And it seems like it's not really connected, but then you think that, well, cybernetics is the study, is the generalization of systems by the general affect which drives them and the impulse which makes them want to be conceptualized as a single system in a set of recursion. That's all Stafford Beer. But then, I dug a little bit deeper into the work of Norbert Wiener, and I realized that that cybernetic system, those sort of loops, and Nick Land talks about this a lot, are essentially driven by affect. And that affect can be something as simple as a thermostat, which has a up or down affect. It wants to reach a certain temperature. And so you either turn the temperature up or turn it down, and it just wants to stabilize and be in homeostasis in that temperature. The human body does the same thing. The human body wants to be in homeostasis all the time, whether that's physiologically or psychologically. Psychologically, it wants safety and security and things to be predictable. And then physiologically, your body wants to have a stable level of things like liquid and temperature and salts and electrolytes and these sorts of things. And your body actually has an incredibly small range of divergence it can have from those levels. Like you die if your core body temperature goes above a couple of degrees where it should be, or below a couple of degrees where it should be. And then so naturally this is all tied into the psychological and physiological system of the human body. where the desire that you experience is your body's drive to keep those things within a certain range. So when you're feeling hungry, it's because your body wants energy. If you're feeling cold, it's because your body is starting to detect the need to heat itself up to keep its homeostatic system at a certain temperature. So yeah, I found that very interesting, and I talk about that more in the book. And it relates to the idea of utopia, because utopia is a sometimes theological, but definitely a political drive to create that homeostatic system as a political entity as well. To keep things, to build things so that they will be perfect, but not just perfect at one time, but perfect moving forward into the future at all times. So yeah, I'm very happy with the book. I think there's some really interesting stuff in there for most people. Like I said, it's written in short, punchy chapters. I don't think you have to read the whole thing to get enjoyment from it. I think you could probably choose the chapters that are most interesting to you. And like I said, they're short enough to read. They don't take a lot of investment, and you can go away and think about them and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm super happy about that. I'm going to read a chapter. I wanted to read a chapter, and I'm going to read the second chapter of the book. I'm just going to have some coffee. I can see some comments, so thank you for leaving comments. Greener Side of Sam is here, my dear friend. Awesome. And then some crazy people as well, who've decided to leave a lot of comments that I can't read all of right now, but I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm going to read the second chapter because I think it does a good job of summing up why I chose attention as the title and the topic, and also kind of gives the direction that the rest of the book goes in. So yeah, this is chapter 2, attention. Very short chapter. Each human subject, by virtue of their attached intellect, projects attention as long as they continue to live. This experiential resource can be engaged in either intellectual or physical matters. Regardless of its focus, attention is projected from the mysterious phenomenon of consciousness. The level of attention given by a human subject varies to a great degree on the basis of energy, intellect, bodily health, prior knowledge, character, and personality. However, it is always present in some form, constantly expelled from the human mind somewhere within the range of engaged genius to coma patient. The flame of attention is only ever extinguished in death. Attention, derived from the Latin attentio and the Old French attention, is to give heed and focus, to direct the mind towards some specific idea or object. It is an incredibly versatile expression with the verb form attend, adverb form attentively, and can be used with all manner of verbs: pay attention, gather attention, attract attention, draw attention, call attention, ignore attention, avoid attention, etc. It is even employed in the exclaim command, attention. In a military context, this activates the obedience of troops in a sudden tensing of the body, making them ready to receive commands. The direction of man's attention is the expression of human will. All abstract expressions of ideas are the formful and concrete alliterations of man's desire and purpose. The biological substrate heuristically distorts the appearances. It can enhance visibility or invoke apparent invisibility through inattention. It is in these ways that attention reflects the most telling expression of our hierarchy of value. In this study, I aim to show how attention, if conceived as a fundamental output of the human subject, connects the work of Schopenhauer, sex and reproduction, desire, the concept of utopia, and cybernetics. I hope to do this in a way that reveals difficult but enlightening truths about the human condition. This framework will then be used to show how attention is fundamentally pertinent to the next epoch of the human story. So yeah, I chose it as the main subject of the book because I think, and this is so obvious today with things like smartphones and the way people arrange furniture and buildings and architecture, is that the direction of things that we attend to so obviously shows what we find important, you know? And so there are later chapters in the book, where is it? Yeah, where I talk about something I call the attention era, which is what I think we're kind of going into now, really. We kind of were in the information era with the internet, but I think we're entering something like the attention era now. It is in the morning here, so I'm on coffee, but I know that elsewhere it's not. So I wanted to talk a little bit about bibliography, which is not very long because it's a short book, but I want to talk about each book and kind of why I used it. So first of all, you have Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, which is my main Stoic source. Obviously, it's an amazing book. It kind of gives the classical, controlled view of what we should do with such attention and desire and those sorts of things. And it is kind of the contra to the way Schopenhauer sees things in a lot of ways, I think. Obviously, as I spoke about, I've got Stafford Beer, who talks about mostly institutions, but his work on cybernetics is really interesting, especially when it comes to his idea of cybernetics being a way to conceptualize a system and then talk about things in recursion, you know? The next, I have a bunch of eugenics sources. So you've got Galton, you've got Ellis, and then Schuster as well. These are books I had to go into the British Library to find. And they're pretty interesting. I think that no kind of literature review of eugenics could really be done unless you had a look at the turn of the century eugenicists and those sorts of people. I just thought you had to do it. And like I said, I think that might be a area for future work that I do, but I'm not sure yet. Yeah, Mannheim was interesting. Ideology and Utopia. Kind of a foundational book for a lot of the social sciences, but it was definitely useful on the topic of utopia and talking about how ideology, but also the normalization of certain things is so important for attention. Like it's really strange how giving your attention to your phone or something like this probably 15 years ago, maybe a bit shorter than that, would have been seen as rude. And it's now entirely been normalized by the culture to do so. And in fact, it's actually seen as a low-class thing not to have a smartphone. and actually a really low class thing to not have a nice smartphone that you care deeply about, which is quite funny. Obviously, I've got Thomas More, Utopia, classic Utopia book, which was really interesting because it kind of vindicated my direction for the topics on this book, because he talks about eugenics in there, and he talks a lot about sexual morality as well, which obviously comes from his Catholic perspective, but yeah, it was very surprising and interesting to see how fundamental it is for that book. Obviously, I have Schopenhauer, not a complete works, but I did have to slog through World as Will of Representation, volumes 1 and 2, which was not a slog because it's not interesting. He's amazing, and I'm, unlike other philosophers, we're kind of lucky that he just kind of compiled his whole philosophical view when he was at the age of 30 into 2 volumes of this, which was fascinating. It's all fascinating, but I obviously had to dig through and look for the parts that were relevant to this book, which did take some time, but was interesting to do. I've got this other book, Dictionary of Body Language, by something, Navarro. He's an ex-spy, like an ex-CIA guy, but he's just got this really amazing book on the different body parts and how they show our affect in different ways, and in ways you don't expect, because the classic one is people think like folding the arms is like a standoffish position, which is just a myth and not true. It can be a sign of comfort, it can be a sign of power, it can be a sign of standoffishness, but it depends. So this guy's got a lot of experience, and it was really interesting to see how the body also demonstrates our attention and what we find important, and the feelings of our desires as well. And so you have Cybernetics, or Controlling Communications in the Animal and the Machine, which is a classic book by Norbert Wiener, which was published in 1945. I think it was at the end of the war. That's a really incredible book. Fascinating, and in some ways a little bit outdated, because obviously it's 100 years old now, but kind of strange how a lot of the things that are said about computing and the parallels that are made to biological matter in the human body are, they just came to pass, basically. And on that subject, obviously we've got Your Brain on Porn, which is a fantastically interesting book and a terrifying book as well. But I'd recommend anyone who's skeptical about the position that there is negative value to modern pornography, I would suggest they read that, because I think it's very clear. The content itself, but then also the delivery mechanisms, it's very clearly not benign, in my opinion. So that's the book, and I'm hugely happy with it. What about the future? I'm not really sure about the future. It took a long time to write this book, and it's a short book as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to be writing anything else in terms of a book soon. I might just have to wait for the muse to hit me in some way. So very unsure. I think the biggest topic that interests me is eugenics. Just because from my surface level research, you've clearly got 2 camps. One is the pervading zeitgeist, which is that it's just inherently evil in some way. which, anyone who's at least partially free thinking will see there's something up with that. Like there's a reason to dig there. And the other side, which wants to rehabilitate it and say, oh, it's actually a good thing. They're in such a minority, but also I'm not sure their perspective is entirely thought through. I mean, the perspective I take in this book is the perspective I take in this book is that it is one of eugenical realism, I call it, and it's the admission that the eugenics process, the eugenical process, it happened in nature before humans were even a thing, and it has happened throughout history, whether we like it or not. And so we can either deny it as a moral evil, we could embrace it as some sort of moral good, but my position at the moment is that we need to engage with it because it's happening anyway. And yeah, I think I find that incredibly interesting, and I think it's true as well. But I'm not sure what conclusions we would come to from that. And in fact, it's one of another shortcoming of this book is that I don't really understand the biological sciences beneath it and all the sciences beneath it. And I know a little bit, and I've written a little bit in this book about the political side of things, but I don't fully understand the story there yet. I think that's the most interesting subject for me. In terms of this channel and stuff, I kind of took a break for almost a year, I think, this past year. And I've not done like many conversations, because I called it Mutually Assured Conversation, the podcast. I think podcasts are kind of dead now, for many reasons, and maybe for good reasons. But pretty much all of those conversations, I did them because it was someone I wanted to talk to anyway. And generally, I've done the same thing with all my creative work. Generally, if I enjoy something, then there's probably other people out there who will also enjoy it. And so, I don't know, if there's someone I really, really want to talk to, and depending on the next topic I decide to go for, that might be soonish, I don't know. But I will just probably ask them to record it and post it, because I think sometimes it is very interesting for people just to have that there. I think yeah, if I find something interesting, it's a good guide for it to be interesting to other people. I mentioned at the beginning, the last live streams I did, obviously I've done some with Owen Leishon doing Schizo FM together, but I did record me reading David Hume at one point, and I think it might be interesting to pick that up. Another thing that was in my mind is I'd like to read Nick Land's Thirst for Annihilation again. And I think that's one that I think lots of people have read Fang Noumena, and it's really great. But I think lots of people haven't read that other Nick Land book, the OG Nick Land book, which, for better and for worse, kind of changed my life when I read it. So I think I might go back to doing that. But I'm not sure how long I'd have to sit and read it. I think the chapters are quite long, and I struggled to read my own writing today. So I'm not sure how I deal with a long Nick Land book, but maybe we'll give it a go. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. But yeah, fundamentally, I'm a tiny little minnow who just does his own thing and likes to create stuff. And I'm very grateful for the audience I do have, and I'm very grateful for the friendships I have made through doing stuff like this. So just want to say, people, you know who you are. But I appreciate all the comments. Yeah, Green Aside Sam, I still want to get your short story book. Yeah, so 27 Club. I'm not sure if I call it a short story book. It's a bit of a weird one. Half artwork, half short stories, a little bit of maybe what you call poetry, but it's essentially just like a reworked diary from some very degenerate years of mine. So I think it's an interesting read. Whether you'll get much from it, I don't know, but it'll make you feel something. Yeah, I think just for the sake of how easy it is to get to that information, I think I'm going to keep it as available as just like a physical book. I'm not going to have that one as a digital book. Yang7759, you're speaking in a language adjacent to my own brother. I have to run, but I just ordered my copy on Amazon. All the best. Thanks, man. It's weird. Like yeah. I'm a tiny little minnow, but it is very encouraging whenever you get a notification from something like Gumroad that says, "Oh, someone's bought your book," or if you get something from Substack someone saying, "Oh, I've some new subscriber or something." Amazon's a bit of a weird one. It doesn't give you like an immediate notification, but if you sell books that month, then you get a deposit into your bank account at the end of that month. And there's about a 3-month delay on Amazon royalties as well, which is really frustrating, but that's just the way it works. But that is very encouraging as well. Even if it's just a completely negligible amount, it's so encouraging to have it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. It's great to be able to just create things today. And yeah, God bless you all.